The sun filtered gently through the curtains of the modest kitchen, casting warm golden rays over the breakfast table. The aroma of toasted bread mixed with the faint scent of brewed coffee as Karen moved briskly around the room, juggling her usual morning routine. She was dressed casually in jeans and a light sweater, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, effortlessly beautiful in the way that mothers often are when they don't realize anyone's watching. Her husband, Mark, sat at the table reading the paper, occasionally glancing up to smile at her or comment on a news story. Their 2 children, Sarah and Luke, still groggy from sleep, munched cereal and argued playfully over whose turn it was to feed the cat. Karen glanced at the wall clock, 7:45 a.m. She grabbed her notepad and reviewed her shopping list one last time. Milk, eggs, dish soap, oh, and Sarah, do you still need glue sticks for school? She asked, pen poised. Sarah nodded with a mouthful of cereal. Karen scribbled it down, then slid the list into her purse. Her movements were practiced, habitual, filled with the kind of confidence that comes from doing the same routine day in and day out. She kissed her husband on the cheek, then her children on their heads, tousling Luke's hair as he protested with a grin. I'll be back in a bit, she said, grabbing her keys from the hook by the door. If I'm not back by lunch, start without me. Her voice had a lilt to it, casual and carefree, the way you speak when you expect the day to go exactly as planned. The screen door creaked open and then shut behind her. The car engine started, the tires crunched over the gravel driveway, and she pulled away from the house. No one in the family noticed it would be the last time they saw her. Her departure was so ordinary, so quiet, so familiar, that the tragedy wouldn't fully set in until much later, when the silence began to stretch into something terrifying. The grocery store's parking lot buzzed with the usual Saturday morning rhythm, carts clinking, doors slamming, and the low murmur of families running errands. A few security cameras flickered above the entrance, capturing a steady stream of shoppers coming and going. Somewhere among them, Karen had arrived just after 8 a.m., according to the timestamp on a grainy surveillance recording. She walked in alone, holding her purse, her list folded neatly in one hand. That would be the last confirmed trace of her. Back home, the hours slipped by unnoticed at first. Mark assumed she was caught in weekend traffic or maybe picking up something extra. The kids played in the yard, shouting and laughing. Noon came and went. When the family sat down for lunch, the empty seat at the table didn't cause concern. Karen often ran extra errands or visited her sister on a whim. But as the sun began to dip and shadows stretched across the living room, a sense of unease settled over the house. By 4 p.m., Mark tried calling her phone. No answer. He called again, then again, pacing the floor. He texted, "Everything okay? Need help?" But the message remained unread. He called the store, hoping she'd left something behind or maybe had car trouble. They confirmed she had been there that morning, but didn't remember seeing her leave. The cashier vaguely recalled her at checkout. Nothing unusual. Just another face in the crowd. By 7 p.m., panic replaced confusion. Mark called neighbors, then her sister, then the police. When an officer arrived to take the report, the questions began. What was she wearing? Did she seem stressed lately? Was there any reason she might want to disappear? Mark, stunned and growing more desperate, could only repeat that Karen was fine, happy, even. She never would have left them. A missing person alert went out that night. The police searched nearby roads, parking lots, and wooded areas. Her phone pinged once near a cell tower west of town, then went dark. Her car was never found. No note, no signs of struggle, no clue what happened between the checkout line and the parking lot. It was as if Karen had stepped off the face of the earth. And the silence that followed would only deepen with each passing day. In the weeks that followed Karen's disappearance, the house once filled with warmth and chatter grew heavy with silence. Her favorite coffee mug sat untouched in the cupboard, her garden began to wither from neglect, and the once cheerful rhythm of the household slipped into something cold and mechanical. Mark moved through the days like a man underwater, speaking only when necessary, his eyes often fixed on the driveway as if she might suddenly return. Sarah, only 11 at the time, began waking up early to make breakfast, mimicking her mother's routines with quiet determination. Luke, barely 9, became withdrawn, clinging to his sister and sleeping with a light on. The police visits slowed. The posters faded and tore from street lamps. Tips dried up. Eventually, even neighbors stopped asking. Life, in its merciless way, moved on, but the emptiness Karen left behind settled deep into the walls. Mark refused to let the case die. He turned their guest room into a makeshift investigation center. Maps, timelines, photos, everything he could gather was pinned to corkboards and taped to the walls. He reached out to private investigators, psychics, online forums, anyone who might offer a new theory. Bills piled up. His work performance suffered. Friends urged him to let go, but he couldn't. He kept telling himself, a woman doesn't vanish without a trace. Not my wife. Not Karen. As the years passed, Sarah grew into a thoughtful, guarded teenager. She excelled in school but avoided talking about her mother. Luke became quiet and observant, rarely mentioning Karen at all. On birthdays and holidays, they lit a candle for her, hoping she'd somehow see it. Every now and then, they'd imagine scenarios, maybe she had amnesia, maybe she was trapped somewhere, maybe she'd escaped something terrible. But those hopes thinned with time. By the 10th year, the family rarely spoke of that day. But each carried its weight, Mark in his eyes, Sarah in her spine, always tense, and Luke in the way he lingered in silence. The wound had scarred over, but it never truly healed. They learned to live around the absence, building their lives on top of a mystery that refused to rest. And yet, somewhere deep down, none of them ever stopped asking the same question: why did she leave, and where did she go? 14 years after Karen vanished, the world had all but forgotten her story. The case had been filed away, her name no longer spoken outside her family's home. But fate, it seemed, wasn't finished with her just yet. On an overcast afternoon in a small town 2 states away, a storage unit employee unlocked a long-abandoned locker due for auction. Dust motes swirled in the stale air as the heavy metal door creaked open. Inside, stacked boxes, old furniture, and a cracked vanity sat untouched, preserved like a forgotten time capsule. As the worker sorted through items for inventory, he opened a battered handbag shoved inside a moldy suitcase. Inside were faded receipts, an expired driver's license, and a worn photograph, creased down the middle. The name on the ID read Karen L. Whitaker. Curious, he showed the items to his supervisor, who quickly recognized the name from a missing persons flyer he'd seen years ago tacked to the bulletin board at a nearby gas station. Police were contacted. The call came through to the cold case division late in the day. An officer dug out the old file, yellowed, thick with dead ends. When he compared the license photo to the last known image of Karen, the resemblance was undeniable. They'd found something. After over a decade of nothing, the smallest spark had reignited the investigation. Back in Karen's hometown, Mark was closing up the garage when a detective arrived at his door. The knock froze him mid-step. He opened it slowly, immediately noting the officer's guarded expression, not casual, not routine. The detective introduced himself and then, almost reluctantly, explained, a storage unit had been opened. Inside was a purse with identification matching Karen's. It appeared she'd been alive well after her disappearance. Possibly living under the radar. Possibly hiding. Mark's breath caught in his chest. You're saying she was there? Alive? That long? We're not sure yet, the detective said carefully. But this is the first real lead we've had in years. We're reopening the case. The news hit the family like a wave. Sarah, now in her mid-20s, sat silent on the couch as her father relayed the update, the photo from the purse laid out before them. Luke, quiet but visibly shaken, ran his thumb over the creased image. It was her. Older, yes, but unmistakably their mother. For the first time in years, the silence around Karen's disappearance cracked open. The family didn't know whether to feel relief, dread, or something else entirely. What had she been doing? Where had she been all this time? And more hauntingly, why hadn't she come back? In the days that followed the discovery of Karen's belongings, the investigation accelerated with a momentum it hadn't seen in over a decade. Detectives pored over rental records tied to the storage unit and followed the paper trail from the receipts found in the handbag. Each scrap, each timestamp, became a breadcrumb leading backward through time. They uncovered a chain of motels, some cash only, others under different names. But a pattern emerged. Karen hadn't simply disappeared. She had been living carefully, quietly, always just outside the reach of attention. Bank records showed activity on an account that had remained dormant for years. Small withdrawals, spaced months apart, from rural ATMs in neighboring counties. Surveillance footage, though blurry and degraded, showed a woman resembling Karen, always wearing sunglasses, a hat, and keeping her face down. She had changed her hair, altered her walk, and used aliases, but beneath the layers of caution, it was her. Mark sat in stunned disbelief at the kitchen table as officers showed him the findings. Each image, each receipt, was another blow. Not only had Karen been alive, she had been choosing not to come home. His confusion battled with anger, and beneath it all, a deeper fear: what had driven her to leave, and what had kept her away. Sarah, analytical and composed on the surface, spent hours digging through her mother's old journals and keepsakes, trying to match the woman they remembered with the person who had vanished and resurfaced like a ghost. Luke, older now but still deeply wounded, remained mostly quiet. His expression was unreadable, but the questions haunted him as much as anyone else. Then came the breakthrough. A dusty file box retrieved from a back office in a long-shuttered motel revealed something unexpected: handwritten notes left behind in a drawer, likely overlooked for years. The handwriting was unmistakably Karen's. In the margins of receipts and napkins, scattered thoughts revealed pieces of a fractured truth. She had feared someone. She mentioned being watched. There were hints of threats, never named, never clear, but enough to suggest she hadn't simply run. She'd been hiding, escaping. Detectives began re-interviewing people from Karen's past. A man's name came up more than once: a former coworker, someone she'd once had a brief relationship with before marrying Mark. He had a history of controlling behavior, even a restraining order from another woman years later. Nothing concrete, nothing criminal that stuck, but enough to raise eyebrows. The narrative began to shift. What if Karen hadn't left her family? What if she had left to protect them? It was a possibility that neither comforted nor satisfied. Mark stared at one of the grainy photos long into the night, wondering how much of their life together had been shaped by fear he never saw. Sarah cried for the mother she thought had abandoned them, now realizing she might have suffered in silence. And Luke, still uncertain what to believe, whispered to no one in particular: "Why didn't she just tell us?" The answers, they were beginning to realize, might be more painful than the questions. The journal was found by accident, tucked beneath a false bottom in the drawer of an old nightstand collected from one of the motels Karen had once stayed in. It was small and leather-bound, the cover worn smooth by time and handling. The motel owner, preparing to sell off abandoned furniture, had almost thrown it away, but something made him flip through the pages. What he found inside led him straight to the local police. The notebook arrived at the precinct sealed in an evidence bag. When detectives opened it, they were met with Karen's familiar, looping handwriting. The first few entries were dated only months after her disappearance. There were no greetings, no salutations, just thoughts, hurried and raw, sometimes disjointed, often scribbled in desperation. "If anyone finds this, know that I didn't leave because I stopped loving them. I left because staying meant putting them in danger." Page after page painted the picture of a woman on the run, not from justice, but from someone she couldn't name directly. She referred to him only as him, or the shadow. Karen wrote about strange calls at night, cars idling near their house, and an overwhelming feeling that she was being watched. She described waking up to find the back door unlocked when she knew she'd locked it. She detailed how she started seeing the same face too many times in different places, how once she was sure someone had followed her while shopping. There were no concrete accusations, but her fear was palpable. She mentioned that when she tried to tell Mark about it, he brushed it off, insisting it was stress, maybe anxiety. She didn't blame him. She didn't tell the kids either. Why worry them? She had written, "They're too young to understand fear that doesn't leave fingerprints." At some point, her entries shifted from fear to resolve. One page stood out more than the rest, dated just days before her disappearance. "I have a choice. Stay and wait for something terrible to happen, or disappear on my own terms. I've planned it now. I hate myself for it. But they'll be safer not knowing." She listed everything she would take, the route she would drive, and the name she would use in her new life. The detail was chilling. It had all been calculated with heartbreaking precision. Sarah read the journal first, her hands trembling as she flipped each page. Her mother's words cracked open a vault of pain she thought had sealed long ago. Luke sat beside her, silent, as if the words themselves hurt to hear. Mark couldn't finish it in one sitting. He kept closing it, wiping his eyes, reopening it again. She was terrified, he whispered one night as the family sat around the kitchen table. And she thought we wouldn't believe her. The journal changed everything. The narrative they'd lived with for 14 years, that Karen abandoned them, was shattered. She hadn't been running from them. She had been running for them. But even with this clarity, a gnawing ache remained. Who was him? Was he still out there? Did she ever feel safe again? The journal answered many things. But it left behind a different kind of silence, one filled not with abandonment, but with sacrifice. And it raised a painful question none of them could ignore. If she had gone through so much to protect them, why hadn't she ever come back when it was over? The small living room was heavy with the weight of memory as Sarah placed the journal on the coffee table, its spine resting against the edge like something sacred and dangerous at once. The air was thick with unspoken emotions, the kind that build over years and erupt in a single breath. Karen's handwriting stared back at them from the open pages, raw and frantic, as though she had just left the room minutes ago. But 14 years had passed. 14 birthdays, holidays, report cards, graduations, all without her. Mark sat at the far end of the couch, staring at the journal but not really seeing it. His hands were clenched between his knees, his eyes bloodshot from nights spent awake since the truth began to unfold. So she thought she had to do this, he said finally, his voice low, strained. She thought I wouldn't believe her. That I wouldn't protect her. Sarah crossed her arms, eyes locked on her father. Did you ever notice anything? She wrote about being followed, about threats. She said she tried to tell you. Mark didn't answer. Right away. His jaw tightened. She was tired. I thought she was stressed. God, we had 2 kids, bills, a mortgage. I didn't think. He shook his head, his voice cracking. I didn't think it was something real. I didn't want it to be. Luke, sitting beside his sister, glanced up. His voice, rarely heard these days, was a soft, steady tremble. She said she saw someone watching the house. More than once. He looked between them. What if he's still out there? The question hung there like a storm cloud. They didn't know the identity of the man Karen feared, only fragmented descriptions and cryptic references in her journal. The police were still investigating, but nothing solid had come to light. No name, no arrest, only shadows. The house, once the center of their lives, now felt too full of ghosts. Karen's presence was everywhere. In the framed photos, the old sweater folded in a closet, the overgrown garden visible through the kitchen window. Yet she wasn't there. Not yet. But the possibility of finding her had become real again. And with it came questions that none of them were ready for. If she's alive, Sarah said slowly, what does that mean for us now? Do we go to her? What do we even say? Mark stood and walked to the window, arms folded across his chest. We say what we need to say. We ask why. We listen. Maybe we forgive. Or maybe we can't. But we need answers. The decision to find her wasn't unanimous, but it was inevitable. They couldn't go back to pretending. The silence had been replaced by a thundering need to understand, to confront whatever truth lay at the end of this unraveling thread. Later that night, Sarah opened her laptop and began typing an email to the detective leading the reopened case. We're ready, she wrote. Tell us where she is. We need to see her. Luke watched her type without saying a word, his expression unreadable. Mark remained by the window long after they'd gone to bed, gazing into the darkness, remembering the last moment he saw her, the swing of the screen door, the gravel crunching beneath her tires, the easy smile she gave before disappearing from their lives. Now, he realized, she hadn't been smiling because she was at peace. She had been smiling because she was saying goodbye. The air was warm but heavy with tension as Mark, Sarah, and Luke stepped out of the car, their eyes fixed on the small cottage ahead. It sat nestled at the edge of a sleepy coastal town, far removed from the place they once called home. It was modest, with chipped paint, a crooked porch light, and a garden overrun with wildflowers. Yet something about it felt familiar, like a distant echo of a life long paused. They had arrived quietly, unannounced, escorted by a local officer who had made contact days earlier. She was here, the officer said. Karen Whitaker. Living under a different name. She hadn't run again when they'd approached her, though her voice trembled on the phone when she'd asked, do they want to see me? Now, standing outside that door, Mark felt his pulse pounding in his throat. 14 years had passed, but it might as well have been a century. Sarah stood next to him, her jaw set, clutching the strap of her bag like it could anchor her to the moment. Luke lingered slightly behind, arms crossed tightly, as though trying to shield himself from whatever was about to happen. The officer gave a quiet nod. "She's inside," he said gently. "Take your time." Then he stepped away, giving the family space. Mark raised his hand and knocked, once, twice, then a third time. Footsteps approached from within. The doorknob turned. When the door opened, time collapsed. There she was. Karen. Older. Thinner. Her once sunlit hair streaked with gray, her eyes shadowed with years of solitude. But it was her. Her hand clutched the doorframe as if it were the only thing keeping her standing. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Sarah stepped forward, her voice a fragile whisper. "Mom." Karen's lips trembled. Her eyes filled with tears that spilled before she could stop them. "I'm so sorry," she breathed. "I didn't know how to come back." Mark's face contorted with emotion, grief, anger, love, all tangled in one. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, voice cracking. "Why didn't you let us help you?" Karen's shoulders sank. "I thought if I disappeared, he'd stop watching. That you'd be safe. I didn't think I could protect you any other way." Her voice was hoarse, trembling. "And then it went on too long. I thought maybe it was too late." Luke stepped closer, his voice steady but small. "You could have come home. Even just once." Karen knelt slightly, looking into his eyes, the ache on her face unbearable. "I wanted to. Every single day. But I was scared that if I did, I'd bring everything I ran from back with me." There was no guidebook for reunions like this, no right words, no sudden closure. Just the jagged pieces of broken time slowly trying to realign. They didn't rush inside. They stood on the porch, under the soft hum of the failing porch light, allowing themselves the first breaths of a new chapter, one filled with confusion, pain, but also the quiet, impossible possibility of healing. And after 14 years, in the fading light of dusk, Karen finally stepped forward, arms trembling, and embraced her children. They cried, not just for what had been lost, but for what might still be found.